This is Greg Troutwine, editor and associate publisher of Maritime Reporter and Engineering News and Offshore Engineer magazines. Welcome to our webinar, Floating Production Systems, 2020 Forecast and Analysis, presented jointly by the American Bureau of Shipping and World Energy Reports. As many of you know, the effects of COVID-19 crisis and the oil supply glut continue to dampen investment appetite in the oil and gas sector, putting new deepwater project starts on hold. But World Energy Reports expects oil prices to continue to rise over the next 6 months toward a gradual pickup in floating production activity beginning in late 2020 and early 2021. Today, we have two sector experts prepared to present more exclusive insights on the trajectory and the pace of this high-value market. The first speaker is Jim McCall, Managing Director, World Energy Reports, and Managing Director and founder of International Maritime Associates. Jim has more than 30 years experience in the global maritime and offshore oil and gas industries, producing 60 multi-client industry reports on the floating production sector over the past 20 years. IMA's reports have been a key source of market intelligence in the offshore industry, and the IMA annual forecast of equipment orders has been widely referenced in investment presentations, industry publications, and other consulting firm reports. Jim has provided extensive market analysis and strategic planning to many of the world's major field operators and offshore contractors. Following Jim, there will be a second presentation from Matthew Tremblay, Senior Vice President of Global Offshore Markets, American Bureau of Shipping. He's based at ABS's corporate headquarters in Houston. In his current role, Matthew holds the global responsibility for strategic planning and client development within the offshore market sector. Throughout his 23-year tenure at ABS, Matthew has served in various engineering and leadership positions throughout the US and Asia, including Pacific Division Vice President of Operations based in Singapore and Vice President of Engineering for the ABS Americas Division. Without further ado, we'll start with Jim McCall.
Well, good morning, everyone. As Greg said, I'm Jim McCall, Managing Director of IMA and World Energy Reports. So this morning, I'll give a brief overview of the FPSO market sector. I'll start with a short overview of oil prices, as oil prices set the scene for all new investment activity in the upstream oil sector. Then I'll provide a brief overview of the floating production sector and the role and growth of FPSOs within this sector. And then finally, I'll discuss the outlook for FPSO orders over the next few years. So if we could go to the next slide.
Okay, so Jim, you've spent more than 30 years closely monitoring the FPSO market, which of course has a trajectory that is closely tied to the price of oil. To start us out, can you please discuss the historical price of oil?
Well, let's begin by saying that oil prices pretty much determine the revenue and cash flow of oil companies, and this in turn impacts investment planning. And the price of Brent crude is generally used as a benchmark for depicting the trend in crude prices. And as shown in this chart, the trend in Brent crude has been very volatile. Over the last 10 years, the oil prices have varied from down in the single digits all the way up to almost $150. In the period of 2010, 2014, Brent traded in the $100, $120 range. It was pretty easy to justify any investment decision in upstream activity at that oil price. And then Brent dropped suddenly due to a supply glut. It dropped down in 2015, 16, eventually getting down to a low of $26 in January of 2016. Went back up again to the third quarter. In the third quarter of 2018, it got back into the 80s. Generally stayed in the 60 to 80 range between 2019 and the first quarter of 2020. and then dropped suddenly, as I guess everyone knows, as a result of the demand collapse due to the coronavirus and also the Saudis flooding the oil market. And Brent hit a low of $9.12 on April 21st. The price of crude has been recovering, as you can see in this chart. In the last 2 months, it's come back into the 40s. As of today, it's trading around $44.
Okay, Jim. Well, as you well know, oil price and oil inventory go hand in hand. From your perspective, what does the current oil inventory look like?
The futures market is probably from our viewpoint, one of the best ways to try to understand what the future price might be. And the futures market is valuing Brent in the 50s over the next few years. More specifically, for delivery at the end of this year, the futures price is $44. At the end of December 20, and at the end of 2022, it's $49. At the end of 2024, $52. And at the end of 2026, it's $54. So based on the futures market, you could say that the prevailing crude price in the middle of this decade will likely be in the low to mid 50s. This means that CapEx investments needs to be viable at oil prices in the low 50s. Big fields offshore Brazil, Guyana, elsewhere should be viable at this price level. For example, Petrobras expects the break-even price on crude on the fields in their pre-salt areas to be $35 to $45 a barrel. But smaller fields may not be viable at $50, $55. A lot depends on the royalty and the production and sharing arrangement and the local content policies.
Okay, Jim. So now we'll shift our focus to floating production systems. So can you tell us the growth pattern in floating production systems and the role of FPSOs within that growth over the last few decades?
Sure. As the chart shows, there's been a pretty strong growth in floating production systems over the last 50 years. The first FPSO was in 1977. There was a production semi before that. But as you can see, the number of units has pretty continuously increased over the last 45, 50 years. These data here in the chart include all production units, both oil and gas units and LNG units. The chart does not include just storage units. But as indicated, the growth has been tapering off. If you look at the period 2005 to 2009, the increase in floating production units was 44%. Just FPSOs and other oil and gas production units, it was 39%. 2010 to 2014, it increased 23% overall, 19% for FPSOs and FPUs. And in the last, basically the last 5 years, 2015 to 19, the growth in total number of production units was 9%. And just FPSOs and production semis, SPAs, TLPs, it was only 3%. So it's leveling off. And in fact, I think if you look at this objectively and take out the LNG units from the chart, you'll have to conclude that the growth has pretty much tapered off. It looks like the number of floating production units has settled in at about the level that it's at now, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it gradually decline as the older units get taken out at a more rapid rate than new units get added.
Okay, Jim. So now that we have the cumulative number, where are the floating production systems currently in operation located?
Well, there are 270 oil and gas production floaters currently in service. These are actually units that are installed. They're not off-field. They're not counted in this chart. And 175 or 65% of these are FPSOs, 37 or 14% are production semis, 28 are TLPs, 21 are SPAs, and 9 are barges. There's another 28 production units that are off-field and available for reuse, including 23 FPSOs. And in addition to these units, there are another 33 LNG production units. That includes 5 liquefaction plants and 28 regasification units, plus another 87 FSOs, floating storage units. So more than 80%, just looking at the FPSOs, more than 80% of these units that are currently in service are located in 4 regions. Brazil has by far the largest number. There are 50 FPSOs installed offshore Brazil, which is 29% of the FPSOs currently in service. There are 43 off Africa, 25%. And off Southeast Asia, there are 26 units, 15%. And finally, in Northern Europe, 22 units, or 13%. Totals up to about 80% of the total number of FPSOs currently in operation.
Okay, Jim. So now we know how many there are, how many they are, where they're at. Let's turn attention to where floating production systems and storage vessels are now being built.
Well, over the last 10 years, there have been about 100 FPSOs ordered for use offshore on offshore fields. It's about an average rate of about 10 per year. About 80% of these units have been new units. New meaning either a new hull or a tanker that has been converted to an FPSO. And about 20% of the 100 have been redeployments of existing FPSOs. Even though there's been an average of 10 per year, there's been a terrific variation in the ordering pace. In 2010, there were 24 orders for FPSOs. And in 2016, there were no orders. So it's really varied quite significantly. In this year, there's been orders for 3 units. Woodside ordered a unit for offshore Africa. Petrobras ordered one for Brazil, and Equinor ordered one for Brazil also. As you can see from the chart, and this is as of June, the predominance of FPSO fabrication is in Africa, is in Asia. And one of the interesting aspects, if you go back to, I was just looking at this earlier to see what, we've been doing this since 1995. And when I look back at the period of 1997, 1998, you see a lot of work in Europe, a little bit in the US, and then you can see what happens here. It's all now in Asia. And China is clearly the lead fabrication center. Most work now is contracted to China. Southeast Asia and Korea are in second place. A lot of the work that used to be going to Korea seems now to be shifting to either Southeast Asia or to China. There's relatively little work in other locations other than topside integration, topside modules, and some topside integration activity. Okay.
So Jim, as we've discussed many times over the years, the real meat of this presentation is the projects in the planning stage. So can you discuss the new projects that you see in the planning stage for the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, we follow the sector on a continuous basis. We update the projects in the planning cycle as we learn about them by talking to companies, looking at their, wherever we can get the information and try to keep it up to date. And at the moment, we're following about 215 projects involving use or potential use of a floating production system that are in the planning stage. All of these projects, well, I should say most, I say 95% of these projects are typically proven discoveries that will likely involve a standalone production floater, not a tieback, as the development solution. And of the 215, 120 of these will likely involve an FPSO. The others will involve a SPAR, TLP. They could also be LNG projects, be involved a liquefaction plant or a regasification plant. And just looking at FPSOs, 70% of the planned FPSO projects are in 3 locations. 33%, third of them are in Brazil, 25% are in Africa, and 13% in Southeast Asia. And around 55% of these planned FPSO projects are at a development stage, physical development stage, that would allow a final investment decision sometime within the next 5 years. The other 45% are projects that are at an early stage of exploration or appraisal, and more likely the FID won't be until about 5 years out, at least 5 years out. The big question is how many of these projects will actually receive funding? They might be physically ready to go ahead to development, but it will be the market decision that prevails at the time that will determine whether the oil company will make the investment decision. So last October, in each October, we make a forecast, a 5-year forecast of floating production orders. And in our latest forecast, which was done in October of 2019, we saw orders for 51 FPSOs between 2020 and 2025, roughly 10 per year. It was a gradual increase, a little bit lower number in the early years, increasing to a little higher number by the time you got to 23, 24, 25. This base forecast, the base forecast was 51 units. And it was based on an assumption that oil prices would generally be in the range of $55 to $65 during the mid-2020s. This assumption doesn't seem to be appropriate anymore. It looks more likely that oil will be trading in the $50 to $55 range over the next 5 years or so, which would be in line with what the futures market is essentially predicting. And at that price level, again, given the forecast that we made in October, that would represent an order pace of about 40 FPSO contracts over the next 5 years, or roughly 8 per year. But of course, no one knows the future. It could be higher, could be lower, but our best estimate at this point is an average of 8 FPSO contracts each year over the next 5 years. Now, meanwhile, 2020 will be a pretty dismal year for FPSO orders. There have been 3 placed so far. 2 of them were in January, 1 was in March. There's been none since. There could be 1 or 2 orders by year end. The Belias FPSO, for example, for Petrobras could turn into a contract. But we really don't see the ordering pace picking up until into 2021. In that period, in 2021, early on, one of the major contracts will likely be that of Petrobras for the Bucios field. They're about to place a tender for 3 more FPSOs for Bucios, which is a tremendous producer within the company. The Bucios field now has 4 FPSOs, and from those 4 units, they're generating 20% of all their production. So Petrobras is definitely looking at increasing the number of units on Bucios. It's now 4. They got 1 more coming, and there's another 7 in the planning stage, 3 of which will be in this tender that's coming up pretty shortly. And the order for those FPSOs will probably be in early 2021. There's probably another FPSO coming up in 2021 for Guyana from ExxonMobil. But the election turmoil in the country has been slowing progress on offshore development. And there could be 1 or 2 projects in West Africa in 2021, depending upon the resolution of local content and other issues that are causing some disruption to planning activity there. So that's the overview of the market. Be happy to answer any questions. All right, thanks for listening.
All right, well, Jim, thank you very much. The format we have is we will absolutely have time for questions at the end, but we thank you for your insights. And now we would like to welcome Matthew Tremblay, Senior Vice President of Global Offshore Markets, ABS.
Thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'd also like to thank Jim for a great presentation. I think while the activity we all wish was a bit higher, I think we're all pleased to see at least a level of reliability that we can all plan to. Please allow me just to briefly introduce ABS to everybody. It's a place where I've worked for my entire career. ABS is the leading class society in the offshore market, whether it's in drilling, offshore production, or other types of units. ABS has been holding the leading market position based on our broad level of experience and technical expertise throughout the entire life of the offshore industry. Slide, please. From the first floating production systems in 1975 to the largest, most complex facilities today that Jim was mentioning, for example, the Buzios projects that'll be coming up next year. ABS has been the class society most connected to the offshore market. We have engineering and survey resources in all geographies that support the production sector. Some examples of that are engineering offices in Rio de Janeiro, field surveyors stationed throughout the world to survey the assets in operation, and shipyard surveyors throughout the construction yards in Asia. Slide, please. So following on from a theme of Jim's presentation, I'd like to touch briefly on the geographic markets and the activity today, and then speak more specifically around some of the technology influencing the FPSOs themselves. Some of the traditional markets have been dormant or slow over the last couple of years, are showing signs of revival. The obvious example of this is Brazil. After some domestic problems and other governmental changes, Petrobras is back contracting at full speed. And other international oil companies are also becoming much more active in the region. We're also seeing increasing activity in the North Sea, both in the Norwegian and UK sector, with several developments being appraised. And then as well, Australia, there's activity such as the Barossa, Browse, Scarborough projects, and others that are showing potential. There are other traditional markets that remain active, such as West Africa. And it's an interesting case as a traditional market with more activities in smaller, newer developing countries such as Senegal and Ghana. And then as well in Southeast Asia, the usual activity in Indonesia and Malaysia and growing opportunities in Vietnam. And lastly, there are emerging markets that haven't traditionally been very present in offshore over the life of the industry. One example of that is the Mexican side of the Gulf of Mexico. With petroleum reform, Mexico is now opening offshore exploration and production to foreign companies, and we're seeing plenty of opportunity there. And as Jim mentioned as well, Guyana, sparked by the impressive discoveries, has ExxonMobil significantly changing the scenario in that region. As well in the Mediterranean, there's potential for projects in Israel and Egypt and Cyprus. And India, while not an entirely new market, is showing increased activity with contracting from ONGC and Reliance. Slide, please. While offshore production activity may rise and fall over the years due to many influences, and as Jim mentioned, we start to see now a leveling off of growth across the industry. Stories that you hear of its demise due to the rise of offshore renewables and shale are somewhat exaggerated. While I'm pleased to see the growth of renewable energy, offshore production is something that's here to stay for a very long time. While the FPSO concept itself evolves and may continue to grow in size, an FPSO is still an FPSO. While a hugely complex facility, at its core, it's a production system, storage system, and offloading system. The basic design concept hasn't really needed to change in decades. What is evolving are the systems and tools around the FPSO and its operation. We've seen an evolution in the financial contracting side and the supply-demand influences that change around the world. But primarily, I'd like to take a moment to comment on the technology that's influencing these projects, from how they're designed, how they're maintained, and eventually even decommissioned. The real evolution influencing change right now is around asset management and the related technologies that support this activity. As we've seen Petrobras and others state publicly, there's a primary focus on improvement in areas such as maintenance performance, reduced manning, and increased asset life. All of these goals can be looked at as being based in enterprise asset management. How do I manage my complex, high-value asset more efficiently throughout its entire life cycle? As another note, and being from ABS, a company primarily focused on safety and risk, I have to say, how do we improve that efficiency safely without adding unacceptable risk to our businesses? As we all know, there's three levers you can pull on when you're trying to improve performance. You improve your processes, you improve your people, or you improve your tools. Slide, please. One means of improving your processes that we've all been looking at for a long time is moving maintenance systems from a calendar-based approach to a condition-based approach. Anyone who knows class or traditional survey practices knows that the rules we've used for over 100 years have been rooted in a calendar-based inspection system. For example, you must inspect this tank this often. The goal in moving to a condition-based system is that you're letting the condition of the asset, be it a pump or the entire hull of an FPSO, tell you how often you need to inspect and do maintenance. Increased temperature in a pump bearing may indicate a need for maintenance. Alternatively, consistent tank inspection showing no corrosion may allow you to increase your inspection interval and save time and money on the activity spent around opening and inspecting cargo systems. While enterprise asset management is commonly focused on improving processes, in the last decade, and even more so in recent years, the digital evolution has presented us with more tools than we've ever had available before. Digital tools entering the market, they allow us to ingest, store, track, and analyze condition data in a way that was never possible before. These are technologies ABS is both building and supporting in our role as a class society, and we're focused on three primary goals: improving asset reliability, minimizing the intrusiveness or impact of the class and inspection process on offshore operations, and ultimately supporting the improved profitability of the industry. Of course, this is all rooted in a framework of safety and quality. The tools that bring these great capabilities to the asset management process, they also bring new risks at a faster pace than the industry's ever seen. All of this new data is an asset. How do I keep it secure? How do I manage the quality of this data? Slide, please. The digital twin is a term you hear a lot these days. However, it's not a term I'm a big fan of because it's very hard to define. If you interviewed 10 different projects who've recently built what they call a digital twin, all 10 of them would give you a different description of what the digital twin is and what it does. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The goal of building and using new tools like this is to meet your business objectives. Different teams have different objectives, and that results in different functionality. But framing around the FPSO subject today, the application of tools such as digital twin or what you could call a digital asset integrity framework, they can be used to support improved condition-based asset management. This all starts with a high-quality condition model. What does a condition model do? It provides improved clarity on the asset condition. It allows for a single source of truth that can be shared with all stakeholders, such as the owner, the operator, or even regulators. It enables more timely, accurate analysis to support decision-making, whether that analysis is physics-based, like doing finite element analysis, or data-based, doing failure mode prediction. Importantly, it enables optimization and maintenance of inspection activities. Like I said before, that goals of by optimizing those maintenance systems, you're reducing intrusiveness, increasing uptime, and improving on your repair planning. And ultimately, it supports the ability to better calculate and forecast remaining asset life. At ABS, we're using some of these tools and systems with our clients, and importantly, we're aligning these optimized maintenance and inspection systems with class and regulatory systems to ensure that compliance is maintained while operations are made more efficient. Slide. The digital tools available today, such as the ABS 3D Condition Manager software you see on the screen, give us a condition tracking opportunities that support the asset management goals of the future. Giving us the opportunity to more clearly track the change in asset condition over time, from construction, operations through late life, we can make more informed decisions supported by more reliable data to operate as an industry more effectively. No different than the change from analog to digital controls, the transition from traditional systems to digital twin will be incremental. I may not need all of the potential analysis capability today to support a new FPSO that's just been installed, but it would be beneficial to deliver an FPSO with a well-built condition model to allow you to begin the full life cycle of the model alongside the actual FPSO. There's a case to be made for incremental adoption of components that would make up what we call a digital twin today. Condition models, sensor data ingestion tools, remote inspection technology, all of these are part of what should be looked at early in project CapEx planning to ensure that an FPSO has what it needs in the future when 10 years from now, an operator wants to apply the latest predictive analytics techniques to forecast remaining fatigue life. All of these are areas where ABS can help by applying the industry's most comprehensive experience in the FPSO market with the digital technologies available throughout the industry today. ABS is available to help build digital asset frameworks that support your business objectives. With that, I'll close on this overview. Thanks, Greg, and I'll be happy to jump into any questions anyone has.
Okay, well, Matthew, thank you very much. We appreciate the presentation. Now we're going to ask a few questions that have come in. Anyone that might have questions, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where you can type in some questions. We have some time. We might not get to all the questions because I've already fielded quite a few. We'll do our best, and if we don't get to you on this webinar, we will get to you via email afterwards. Matthew, the first question is actually directed specifically to you. What do you see as class's role around the application of new digital tools offshore?
Thanks, Jim. That's a good question. Class has a unique role in that we're one of the few, if not the only entity that touches every aspect of the project lifecycle. From the designer's initial design concept through construction with the shipyard, operations offshore with the operator, and even through decommissioning. Class is connected to the asset and the tools and systems that support it. As new tools are developed, Class has really two primary roles. First, sharing the broad base of technical and domain experience we have to contribute to the development of these tools, both as a thought leader and as a tool builder. But second, to ensure these tools are being implemented safely. We're bringing in new technology at a rate faster than any time in history. And that means we're also incorporating the failure modes that come with this new technology just as quickly. Sometimes Class needs to be the entity that kind of raises its hand and asks, sometimes the hard questions that are intended to keep us all safe offshore. But overall, our role is really to help facilitate the development of these tools and work with all parties involved as we touch all parts of the industry to help take advantage of the resources provided and incorporate those resources across the different stakeholders on the FPSO.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. We have a second question actually to Matthew, and this one's actually from me because, as you know, on our maritime side, we're covering all these new emerging technologies and the risk that is associated with them. Now, class rules are primarily about managing risk. What risks do you see related to the application of new technologies that may not be entirely evident?
I mean, a great example, sticking to the digital theme here is the risks related to cybersecurity. As our operations become more and more dependent on the reliable use of the ones and zeros, we'll call them, how are we keeping those ones and zeros safe and healthy? Both from an IT perspective, such as protecting yourself from the hacker trying to steal or disrupt your operations, but also from the OT or operational technology perspective. How do our own people and systems interact with each other? One of the greatest risks to cybersecurity actually comes from the inadvertent actions of our own employees. So OT cybersecurity is about the rules and systems you have in place as a company or as an operator for your operation to maintain the safe activity of within your digital structure. So, one of the things that ABS has done over the last few years is as a stakeholder that understands the relationship between the operations and the technology on board, we've developed requirements and audit services around the OT, operational technology, cybersecurity in the offshore and marine industry.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Excuse me. Jim, this one is actually targeted to you. Obviously, you've been covering this market intimately for, I believe you said since 1995. You've seen the ups and the downs. Do you see consolidation coming in the deep water sector?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think so. In fact, it's already started. Last year, when Occidental bought Anadarko, they basically took over a company that was one of the major players in the Gulf of Mexico deep water. So Oxy now has a major role in that sector. And last week, Chevron bought Noble. And Noble is the major player in the deep water gas sector offshore Israel and Cyprus. So Chevron has moved into that sector. And Chevron, for some time now, there's been talk of using floating LNG plants to monetize the gas that's offshore Cyprus and the surplus gas that's offshore Israel, and to use floating production systems to do that. And Chevron may take a look at that, and who knows, it might actually, this acquisition may result in some FLNGs being built for the Eastern Mediterranean. And beyond that, there are other companies out there that look like promising possible candidates. I don't know if the company would agree, but I think Hess would be a possible candidate for someone with their presence offshore Guyana. Apache would be probably a good candidate with their presence offshore Suriname. Tullow might be a good candidate with their the price having come down to about 10% of what their value was over the 52-week past. So I think deep water companies, yeah, I think there are going to be fewer of them. Probably a year from now, there'll be some additional consolidation that takes place.
Okay. This next question is also a markets question, but since ABS is directly referenced in the question, I'll give you, Matthew, the first shot. So ABS is the class society for the majority of FPSOs in Brazil. What do you see happening differently in this next phase of offshore development than you've seen in the past?
Oh, the biggest change, I mean, what I think about when I started working on projects in Brazil over 20 years ago, the industry had one customer, it was Petrobras. Today the offshore market in Brazil is open to many others, and it drives new ideas around operations and innovation into the market. Most recently, new domestic contracting requirements are also going to influence the project proposal strategies and the approach that contractors take to selecting which opportunities they want to focus on as where they want to place their bids. So it's a much more dynamic market these days than it was historically back 20 years ago when Jim and I both started our close involvement with the market and the industry there. So that's kind of the biggest shift I see in how the next phase is going to be different than the past.
Okay. Jim, I just want to give Jim a shot. Jim, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with that. And I would just add that I think Petrobras is going to try some new ways of contracting for FPSOs. They may go back to some direct purchases, maybe just offering an EPC contract, but not, lease operate. And in order to bring in additional companies that would compete for the work, I think that's probably maybe the biggest change that might take place.
Okay. Matthew, this is another class question. Specifically, what are class societies doing to support activity hotspots like Brazil and elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that follows on well to the last question, and a good point Jim made in that the contracting strategies you see changing are going to be bringing in new players into Brazil. So the best example I can give is actually development of services and tools that support the challenges around domestic compliance. Using Brazil as a great example. Brazil's an example of a geography with a complex domestic offshore compliance regime with very specific regulations through multiple agencies that are applicable to addressing construction details, for example. While contractors like SBM and MODEC have been working there for a long time, these new players are moving in who don't have the same service history in Brazil. So one of the things class and ABS specifically have done is we've developed optional class notations that are associated with guides that we've published and advisory services that we offer to help these new players moving into the geography ensure that they're building these facilities in compliance and won't have a significant problem when they arrive in Brazil with compliance with certain domestic requirements that may be in addition to or different than international standards. So preventing any surprises when these vessels are pulled into Brazil after construction for 2-3 years and for commissioning is a big goal of class and supporting using the experience we have to support the industry.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, again, I thank you very much for your participation. We have hit our hard stop time based on my stopwatch here. I still have about 14 or 15 questions, and for everyone who's asked them, we absolutely will get back to you via email. This presentation will be available online. I don't know how soon, but it'll be relatively shortly after the conclusion. So again, Jim, Matthew, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Greg. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.